Okay, everyone should be able to hear me now. I see a message from Tina. So we're just gonna get started. Thank you everybody so much for coming. I see there's over 50 people online. So welcome everyone. And we're gonna get started. So thank you for coming to Using Data for Action, Advancing Women's Leadership, a webinar led by Glow Red and also the Canadian Red Cross. And happy belated International Women's Day to everyone. So thank you. Okay, so before we get started, I wanted to do a land acknowledgement. And for our international guests, which we have many online, a land acknowledgement is quite common practice in North America. And its purpose is to recognize that we as settlers and as colonizers are people who are not part of Indigenous groups here in Canada. This land was not given up by the Indigenous groups, and we are on it today. So it's seen as an act of reconciliation and the beginning of a learning process. Can I ask everyone to mute themselves, please? I will just mute everyone here. So the land acknowledgement for this region is, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. So thank you, everyone. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We're going to take all questions at the end of the webinar. So I'm going to ask everyone to go to Slido. So that's a website you can go to. It's sli.do. And when you get there, you'll see this question here, joining a meeting. Just put in GLOW. So all caps, GLOW. And you'll be able to write your questions there. You can also thumbs up, so like questions that you would like us to ask. I'll be moderating that, and the most popular questions will be the ones asked to our speakers. So please, all questions, save for the end. So before we get started, you're probably wondering, what is Glow Red? Who is this group that's inviting you to the webinar? So Glow is the global network of women leaders in the Red Crescent movement. We have over 200 women leaders throughout all regions of the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. We're in over 100 different national societies, as well as members in the ICRC and the IFRC. So this picture you're seeing is from our Glow Red network meeting here in Ottawa, Canada. A little bit of an update for those of you who aren't super familiar with GLOW. These are some pictures from us at the statutory meetings that took place in Geneva in December 2019. So for a lot of you, this might have actually been your first time interacting with or meeting GLOW at the statutory meetings. So you, as some of you know, we had 3 events that maybe some of you were at. We had a luncheon, an official side event, and a Red Talk. There was the passing of the resolution on women in leadership that was put forth by GLOW, as well as the pledge on women and leadership, which you can see here. There was a joint signing with some GLOW members. That pledge is still open for signature. If you're interested, please reach out to me. You can just respond to the meeting invite. We also had a change in the electoral face. So 18 women were elected to committees and commissions, up from 14. 2 women were elected to the Standing Commission, including Mercedes, congratulations, who's one of our speakers today. And the ICRC will also be represented by a woman. And GLOW had 45 new members. So new members and old, welcome. A lot of you have probably been interacting with our 100 Voices project on social media. We've been doing a countdown to International Women's Day. So these are 10 of the voices that we featured. These were women who were nominated at the statutory meetings. So some of you might have come and visited me at the Glow Red booth and put up a post-it on our map. So these are the stories that we've gone forward with. We love getting more nominations. So again, please let me know if you're interested in nominating yourself or someone from your national society to be featured on the 100 Voices website. The website, for those of you who haven't been, is glowred.org. And you can read through all these super inspiring, amazing stories of women in our movement who are really making a difference. And then the last update on Glow is some of you may have heard of our Women's Leadership Workshops. So 12 participants were in attendance. This took place in March 2019 in Geneva. The purpose of the workshop was really to prepare these women for international governance positions. 3 of these women went on to be elected in the December 2019 statutory meetings. Glow in the future is hoping to replicate these workshops in different regions and in different languages. So these are some of the pictures of the amazing women that were there at our workshop. And one of these women is Mercedes Babe. And Mercedes will be speaking today. So first of all, again, congratulations, Mercedes. As many as you know, she was elected the chair of the Standing Commission at the International Conference very recently in December 2019. Mercedes has been in the Red Cross movement for over 50 years with the Spanish Red Cross and also with the IFRC. She's a trained social worker and created the Social Welfare Department of the Spanish Red Cross in the 1970s. And she's also the elected vice chair of the Red Cross branch in her town where she lives. So welcome, Mercedes. She's joining us today from beautiful Madrid. So
Thank
welcome.
you, Erika. Thank you.
And our second speaker today is Pip Henty. So Pip is from the Humanitarian Advisory Group. She specializes in gender and inclusion in humanitarian practice. So a lot of you probably recognize the reports that Pip and her colleagues have put together. Data on diversity, humanitarian leadership under the spotlight, as well as drawing on our diversity, humanitarian leadership, amongst many others. So she's leading research into diverse and inclusive humanitarian leadership and developing strategies for gender equality in the emergency management sector across the Pacific. So in order, the title of this webinar is Using Data for Action. So in order to understand how we can use this data and how we can use this research, we need to understand what the research and the data is. And luckily for us, Pip has agreed to stay up very late and join us from Melbourne, Australia, and discuss some of this research with us. So with that, Pip, I invite you to please start presenting. Oh, you got to unmute yourself though.
Yep, there we go. Sorry, it's a late night. Thanks, Erica, and thank you to everyone who's dialed in today or this evening, this morning, depending on where you're dialing in from. Absolutely thrilled to be presenting and to engage with the network. It's a really important piece of work, and yeah, just really thrilled to have that opportunity. So I guess I'll just take it back a little bit around who I am and who HAG is as well. So as Erica mentioned, my name is Pip. I'm with Humanitarian Advisory Group based in Melbourne, Australia, and we're a small social enterprise providing research, monitoring and evaluation, training, facilitation, strategy and policy advice, and advisory services more broadly to a number of humanitarian actors globally, including local and international NGOs, UN agencies, private sector, governments, and academic institutions. And what we aim to do is we aim to bring fresh thinking to challenge the status quo of humanitarian aid. And we want to be part of the story that tracks tracks humanitarian action from its current conundrum around humanitarian need currently outstripping the capacity and agility of the sector, to one that realises its full potential, and a sector that challenges power structures and transforms the way that people are treated in a crisis around the world. Mercedes, if you don't, sorry, Eric, if you don't mind going to the next slide. So what we're interested in doing, and what we're leading here at HAG, which is also an intentional acronym for anyone who's interested, is with the humanitarian landscape rapidly changing, greater humanitarian need than ever before. There's funding shortfalls and increasing complexity within disasters. We're seeing that the increasing need and complexity to meet the demands on humanitarian leadership is mounting. And that includes enabling and guiding organisations to respond more quickly, more effectively, more efficiently than what we've ever seen. So it's all about how do we strengthen humanitarian leadership to make it fit for purpose. And in our mind, part of that is that the international humanitarian sector needs greater diversity of approaches, funding sources, and thinking to confront some of those challenges. Next slide, if you don't mind, Erica. So what we're looking at doing is we're undertaking research, and the Data on Diversity report was the second report to come out of the research stream, is to undertake research to understand how diverse and inclusive humanitarian leadership teams can contribute to tackling some of the challenges that face the humanitarian system, and to actually start to create an evidence base for increasing diversity within humanitarian leadership teams. And I'm sure you will have heard it all anecdotally around, organisations that have, more diversity or more women or very diversity of thought are better at doing A, B, C. But what our sector lacks is the evidence behind that. And part of that is around a lot of work around diversity and inclusion, and what we call diversity dividends have been done in the private sector. And for the private sector, that's around their dividend is money. So increased diversity equals increased funding. But for us, it's around increased diversity, more effective and efficient humanitarian response. And it's really hard to make that link. So that's what we're looking at doing in the next stage that I'll talk through. Next slide, if you don't mind, Erica. So what have we done? So it's really exciting to hear that the Data on Diversity report has been used, and it's by no means supposed to be a super comprehensive deep dive into the system, because we're aware that this has never been done before. So for us, it's about starting to build that evidence and build that momentum so that there is buy-in from the humanitarian sector, from all stakeholders, to put a spotlight on humanitarian leadership and the sector more broadly around diversity and inclusion. What we've done so far, before this report, as I mentioned, we put out a framing report called Drawing on Our Diversity, which was published in 2018. And it started to unpack those diversity dividends that I mentioned before. So around increased profits, better risk management, better decision making. That was all unpacked in the private sector, and started to think through how could this be applied to our sector? What are some of the lessons and methodologies that we can use to apply this? And so from there, we started to have conversations with organisations that were interested in diversity and inclusion, and we came up with a high level methodology that would shape the 2-year research program. And from that, organisations felt it was really important to get some sort of lay of the land as to who is filling the leadership roles, who's in the sector more broadly, and start to get some data around that. So what we've done is we've released the Data on Diversity report, which was really exciting. It had around 1,500 respondents from 115 countries at a number of different levels. It was also translated into five languages. So it is really, really exciting to be able to report the findings from the survey. And as I mentioned, the report was really starting to provide some evidence as to who fills humanitarian leadership roles, but also most importantly, what is the impact of that? What is the impact of having more diverse and inclusive leadership teams versus less diverse and inclusive leadership teams? And as I mentioned, it represents that first step for us in the research process that's designed to unpack the relationship between diverse and inclusive leadership teams and effective humanitarian action. And the other thing that's really exciting is we feel like this research has enabled us to shift the discussion from potentials and possibilities to realities and facts a little bit more, and to give an understanding of the current composition of humanitarian leadership teams, which allows the sector to reflect on their practices around diversity inclusion, whether that be in recruitment, the composition of leadership teams, how we measure success, and how we actually provide tools and resources to give the skills, to give the teams what they need in order to create diverse and inclusive leadership teams. Next slide, thanks, Erica. So for us, the really exciting piece to come out of this was around starting to pull together some data around, okay, what does all this mean? So it's really, really exciting to see that there's a clear relationship between diversity and inclusion and effective humanitarian teams. And the fact that that humanitarian leadership teams, that are perceived as diverse are 3.4 times more likely to also be perceived as inclusive. So it's all well and good to have diverse teams and to have recruitment strategies and to have drives within organizations, but actually if you don't focus on and create that inclusive culture, then what happens is you see that diversity gets lost, and that those people and that people aren't satisfied, and they're not feeling included in the workplace, whether that's, and diversity, is incredibly broad, and we're not just talking about gender, age, disability, race, ethnic background. We're also talking about diversity of thought, diversity of experience, whether that be educational, professional, even organisational background, etc. And so what we can see here is that there's a clear, we're talking significant numbers. So things like if you're more diverse and inclusive, then you're over 9 times more likely to perceive to be listening and acting upon the views of colleagues, which creates that inclusive environment. Importantly, again, you're over 13 times more likely to be perceived to be reflecting the diversity of the communities that you work in, which again, is really critical to components of humanitarian action, including accountability to affected populations. And we've also seen, with the increased focus, and rightly so, on the prevention of sexual exploitation, abuse, and accountability to affected populations, that is really important to think about things like how we're managing risk, how decisions are being made, because they're not necessarily new conversations we're seeing in the sector. So how can we shift things to do things differently is a really exciting part for us. Next slide, thanks, Erica. The other thing is that, importantly, currently, people, the sector more broadly don't think that their leadership teams are diverse and inclusive. And that shifts, interestingly, across, NGOs, INGOs, national NGOs, INGOs, Red Cross, and UN agencies. And you can see that there on the slide around national NGOs are perceived to be the most diverse and inclusive. Kind of UN agencies and INGOs coming in and that second and third. And I think that's just a really important reflection. And again, this is kind of that high level snapshot, and what we're looking at doing in the next stage, which I'll get to, is around unpacking what a lot of this means, which will be contextualized as well to a response. The other thing I think which is important is that there's differences between different groups of people. So men have a significantly more positive perception around diversity and inclusiveness in their leadership teams than women. With 54% of surveyed men thinking their leadership teams are mostly or very diverse versus 28% of women thinking their leadership teams are mostly or very diverse. And similar statistics around the inclusive piece. So 52% of men perceiving their leadership team to be mostly and very inclusive versus 32% of women. I think too that recent articles and issues that have been highlighted have put a spotlight on cultures in some international humanitarian organisations that lack leadership accountability, and that to improve accountability and measures to prevent PSCA and other issues is that organisations have been doing things like updating codes of conduct, working out the best way to socialise and ensure adherence to certain agreed behaviours, and that again links to that inclusive piece. Next slide, thanks, Erica. So I guess drilling into around who does make up the sector based on the data we have. So we've got that international staff are 1.5 times more likely to fill the most senior humanitarian leadership roles than local staff, with 60% of those roles being filled by international staff. And that, interestingly, INGOs have a significantly higher percentage of local staff in the most senior humanitarian leadership positions than the UN. And there was several barriers identified around local staff moving into humanitarian leadership. And I think it's an interesting conversation to have as we're also driving the localisation agenda. And some of the barriers identified included the difference in expectations of senior national staff versus international staff, a lack of training and development opportunities, aversion to risk, and limited support. And what happened is a lot of these barriers create a really narrow pipeline for national staff. And, we heard anecdotally stories around organisations wanting to be seen to be doing localisation really well, and putting, appointing national staff into very senior leadership positions where that development hasn't happened, and what was identified as setting them up to fail. So if you don't have, the support and the training needed to fill some of those roles, then you are going to fail no matter who you are. So it was around some of that mentality that the different stakeholders and different organisations held. Next slide, thanks. And I think this is a really interesting and I'm sure not surprising infographic and finding either, particularly with more women entering into the humanitarian sector, and particularly at that entry level and more junior leadership roles, and you see that pipeline close. There was discussion around why isn't that figure at that senior level even more contrasting and more stark, and I think it's important to keep in mind that around gender and particularly women's representation in senior leadership and leadership more broadly, there's been a lot of work done over the last few years, and that's reflected in our report that we did that unpacked specifically women in humanitarian leadership, and we've seen the contrasting statistics that show that there has been that work done. So you can see here that 57% of the most senior leadership positions in the organisations that we surveyed are occupied by men and 43% by women. However, women are then, as I mentioned, overrepresented at project level leadership, as you can see, representing 68%. And what we found too is that the gender composition of humanitarian leadership is more heavily male dominated in countries that were determined to be high or extreme security risk. And it was seen that security issues can significantly reduce women's representation within leadership. Men filled 60% of those leadership positions overall, which you can see is different where women have been overrepresented in that more senior junior leadership here. I just wanted to flag too that our survey, I think it's important to acknowledge what we didn't collect as well. And in terms of genders, we didn't collect data on sexual orientation and gender identity more broadly due to ethical considerations and challenges associated with designing a questionnaire and a survey that is an incredibly blunt instrument that was cross-culturally, could be applied globally across 5 languages. And we were advised on that by a number of experts in the field that we had consulting, both from within the humanitarian sector and externally as well. I think regardless, the global scope of humanitarian work means that there are many contexts in which particular sexual behaviours and gender representations are highly stigmatised, illegal, and often prevent the deployment of diverse sexual and gender orientation staff. And it's important for humanitarian organisations to consider how to balance staff safety with equal opportunity as well. And there has been a lot of articles that have come out recently, particularly in the last 18 months to 2 years and beyond that do have a focus on staff who identify as sexually and gender diverse. In terms of disability, don't mind the next slide, sorry, Erica. Again, global data indicates that there's approximately 15% of the world's population identifies persons with disabilities. And our survey data indicated that persons with disability make up just 4% of humanitarian leadership roles, which really do highlight the significant lack of representation of persons with disabilities at that leadership roles. And you can see some of the quotes there around organisations acknowledging that it's just not it's not something that's done well. It's not something that's thought through thoroughly across a number of organisations and stakeholders, and that there's an opportunity to strengthen inclusion and representation with persons with disabilities. Next slide, thanks, Eric. And then the lower socioeconomic piece, we used educational background and parents' educational background as a proxy for socioeconomic backgrounds, acknowledging again that there are many ways to do that, and that was just what was available to us with the tools that we had. And 69% of respondents across all positions in the sector have a master's degree as their highest level of education, with comparing that to only 21% having an undergraduate as their highest level of education. And again, not surprising given the recent, what we're calling the professionalisation of the sector. With that being said as well, 57% of parents of those interviewed either had a university degree, so at that undergraduate level or higher. And what we found was that stakeholders reflected on the fact that socioeconomic background is one of the most defining features of the pipeline in the humanitarian sector, particularly as the sector has become more competitive, and it is which means you zero in on a group of people with specific educational backgrounds, particularly with thinking through the experience a lot of organisations require of those who may be entering the sector. So that's around volunteering, internshipping, etc. for free, which is just not something that everyone has access to do. Next slide, thanks, Erica. So what's really exciting is there's evidence starting to show, and I know a number of organisations are doing work independently. We've had organisations who just from being interviewed turned around and said, "Oh, we don't even have a D&I policy." We're now creating one. So I think there's a lot can start to be done with this information. And where to now is really exciting for us. If you don't mind going to the next slide, Erica. So what we're actually now trying to do is we're trying to draw a statistical correlation between and be able to say if you're more diverse and inclusive, you as an organisation in your leadership team, then you're more likely to respond and have better risk mitigation around PSEA, have better feedback and complaints mechanisms around AAP, and promote innovation promote innovation within your workplace. And so what we're trying to do is start to hone in on some specific parts of a humanitarian response that create effective, that draw a parallel between whether you're effective and efficient. And what we're doing is we're actually going into the Philippines in May and June and working with a number of organizations who are operational there, and actually going and mapping against the scorecard we've created how diverse and inclusive a leadership team is, and then how effectively they, as I mentioned, manage risk around PSEA, what their complaints and feedback mechanisms look like around AAP, and how they promote innovation and creative problem solving within an organisation. And we hope that's what we're testing. We don't know what the results are going to be, but what will come out of that will be an overarching report that will start to, again, we're hoping, depending on the findings, build on that evidence around, the need to be, to have a focus on diversity inclusion. And it's about doing things differently, and it's about doing things better, and recognizing again that diversity is really broad, and unpacking what that means. So I guess that's everything for me. I know that's a lot, and there's time for questions at the end, and I do welcome questions, whether it's about the research more broadly, the methodology, anything on the findings, next steps, and again, thank you for letting me present.
Thank you so much, Pip, for that overview of the research that you and HAG in general are doing. I know we're all really looking forward to the research you discussed at the end that will actually prove the link between diverse leadership and being better, doing our work better in a more inclusive and effective manner. So thank you so much. Just a reminder to everyone, we are going to hold questions to the end. You can go on Slido, and the hashtag is GLOW to ask questions. So we know we need to reflect the population that we serve. We know from Pip and HAG's research the benefits of more diverse leadership. But the question now is, what does a woman's leadership journey look like? And who better to ask than the lovely Mercedes Babe, who has been with the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement for over 50 years. So with that, Mercedes, I invite you to the floor. Please let us know or tell us about your leadership journey and your experience as a woman leader in the movement.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you, Pip, for very interesting presentation. Really amazing, and mine will be much more modest and based on personal basis, as you asked me for. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, dear friends and GLOW members and other supporters attending this webinar. It's really a pleasure for me to be here today and share with you, after thanking the organizers of this conference for their idea, to share with you my leadership journey, as they asked me to speak about. I would like to confess I never consider myself a leader, I have to say. Though sometimes I felt I have some followers, but I was thinking I was a leader. Starting my journey in a very personal manner, I would like to tell you that I'm the eldest of a large family of 9 brothers and sisters. And even though I come from a very traditional family, my role was always recognized and promoted as the eldest sister, which in part conditioned me to be seen as a model for my young siblings. I was rather a shy person, but always challenged and felt encouraged by my parents, especially my father, by saying, you should and you can do it. So I always kept in mind that kind of obligation that I should and I could do it. In this sense, I always faced challenges as needs I needed to overcome. I started my Red Cross life, as it was mentioned by Erica, as a volunteer in Red Cross Youth. Then I became an officer in charge of programs for youth. And after that, I continued my career path with different functions and responsibilities in Spanish Red Cross in Madrid and in the International Federation in Geneva. I have always been lucky and fortunate finding people, colleagues and managers who respected and trust me, gave me confidence and allowed me eventually to be wrong. And this is a very good way to learn, by mistakes. You do and people who correct you and suggest other ways to do it. That was increasing my self-confidence and self-esteem. And I always thought, if others can do, I could also do it. And I work hard every day to prove myself I could do it. Along my professional life, I have found in my path very good supportive women and some supportive and challenging men as well. And I learned how to be supportive to others. I think this is a two-way path. Feel supported by your managers and be supportive to those you manage. In any case, we should be aware that not always you find a path of roses, and that we need to keep up our commitment, determination, and perseverance. We should believe in what we are doing and sometimes need to have dreams to pursue. Dreams as aspirations to make them come true. We have to strive to get what we want to be or what we want to do. However, with patience, or at least that was my philosophy, being realistic and not willing to encompass everything in one hit. My work as a staff of the Spanish Red Cross ended, well, I'm summarizing, as you can imagine, my 50 years. You probably are thinking I'm a very old person, and I am, but when I decided to accept to take an early retirement. However, my Red Cross life did not finish with my job or work life. Then I continued working as a volunteer again, and I took up a new challenge, being a candidate for the elections as a member of the local committee of the Red Cross in the town where I live, just in the outskirts of Madrid, and also at the regional committee. After a long professional career in the headquarters in Madrid and also at the Secretariat in Geneva, and mostly working in the international sphere, it is very inspiring to see closely how the needs of vulnerable people in the community can be supported thanks to the commitment of local volunteers. It's really great, I can tell you. And I was working in this context, and at the beginning of last year, I received an email from a GLOW member who was, by the way, in the picture you show at the beginning, saying literally the following. I just found a few days ago and I thought, okay, I will read it, this email that I received in January 2019. I'm writing to you as one of the senior women of the movement with a good memory. I'm trying to develop a list of possible Red Cross, Red Crescent women for the Standing Commission 2019 to see if we can encourage some of them to post their candidature. Ideally, we should find a European woman. Do you have any suggestions or ideas? Is the Spanish Red Cross also preparing to nominate any woman to the IFRC commissions or committees? As you might have heard, Glow Red is arranging a workshop for women interested in international governance positions in Geneva in March. This was in January. It would be great to have you yourself or any of potential Spanish women candidates there. And I will be happy to have a phone call with you to discuss further. I was a bit shocked, I have to say. And then I thought, well, why not me? It's true that several people before that have suggested me that I could apply as a candidate to become a member of the Standing Commission. And it was quite some 2 or 3 years before there were already some people mentioning. And then, honestly, 13 months ago, I had not my mind ready for this step. I have to say that coincidences are very curious. And today, 11th March, is exactly 1 year that this Women Leadership Workshop started in Geneva. Exactly the 11th of March, 2019. A workshop in which I finally decided to participate. It was organized by Glow Red, as we mentioned, the global network of women leaders in Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. The workshop aimed to prepare women to better succeed in their current leadership positions, and specifically to prepare them as potential candidates for future governance position in the Red Cross or the Red Crescent movement. We learn about the strategies for addressing the challenges facing women leaders, recognize and adopt strategies for dealing with bias and discrimination, identify and adopt disruptive behaviors to tackle discrimination in an assertive and respectful manner. We plan for and practice how to organize a robust professional campaign for governance candidates and learn how to present the issues we want to promote with power, confidence, and presence. So I can tell you I learned a lot. I can assure you that the workshop helped me to shape my decision to run as a candidate for the Standing Commission a few months later. It's true that I worked hard in the following 6 months to be prepared and better equipped for the challenge of the elections during the international conference in December 2019. And then you know the results. I must recognize that Glow Red, and especially the workshop we mentioned, was clearly instrumental in my taking the final decision to run and in supporting a doubtful candidate until the end. I felt encouraged by other participants during the workshop and by the senior leaders of Glow Red. And I felt and continue feeling the support of Glow Red members. Now, I am the chair of the Standing Commission of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, which I had not even had in my dreams. And I'm now fully committed to support other women in this path to senior leadership positions in the movement. Women supporting women is one of the basics I learned last year, as unfortunately and more frequently of what we can imagine is precisely women who keep tripping or pulling the carpet underneath other women. So fellow women, we need to be more cooperative with colleagues and support all those who can continue their careers and accept to take leadership position within the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. We all need it to be perceived and in reality to be part of a more inclusive and diverse organization. And I was impressed by the data provided by Pip when she was saying that the Red Cross is perceived as a 22% of people perceive the Red Cross as a diverse organization and 33 as an inclusive organization. And I think I would differ a bit from these figures, but we need to make a change. So up to here, it is my personal journey. Then, Erica, you also asked me to share with the audience my position on the importance of data on diversity and why we need the numbers and reports as what PIP has shared with us. We are a movement of 194 components, 2 international institutions, ICRC and the Federation, and 192 Red Cross and Red Crescent societies across the world. All of them working to help the most vulnerable in different ways and in different contexts. We are an incredible, diverse network. Collecting data is not always easy. The Red Cross and Red Crescent movement have been doing a great effort to compile information, and recently the Federation Databank and reporting system is a way of gathering information based on the most important set of indicators that demonstrate the activities of national societies. Yesterday, the Secretary General of the International Federation just sent some data extracted for the important contribution of national societies precisely to this Federation reporting system. He says that it's extremely valuable to increase transparency and accountability of our network, to develop evidence-based intervention and programs, and to inform greater knowledge and understanding of capacities, resources, and activities of national societies. Behind the numbers are millions of stories, stories about different Red Cross and Red Crescent programs, stories about diversity, and stories about people, the volunteers and staff, and the people we serve. Having good data allows us to verify how inclusive the movement is, or how few inclusive experiences we are having, and how the national societies are reaching our objective, the most vulnerable people. Collecting and analyzing data give us information about balance and representation, and on the diversity of our workforce and governance bodies. To finalize, I would like to share with you an example that shows how old is the debate that takes our attention today. 30 years ago, it was in the Red Cross Red Crescent magazine from January, April 1990, they raised this issue saying, what has happened since the Red Cross Foundation? Are women engaged in our governance, activities, and reach? Are they taking the lead in decision making? The women of Castiglione nursed and accompanied the wounded soldiers in Solferino. But then, when the Red Cross was born 4 years later, it was no women in the attendance of the first organization. Today, women are still nursing and wounding and calming the sore. But are they in the decision making? Sorry to recognize that this was 30 years ago, reminding what it was in 1863, and sorry to say that we are close to that in 2020. So thank you very much. I end here and leave Erica to open the debate. Thank you to you.
Thank you so much, Mercedes. Thank you for sharing your personal story of a 50-year career with the Red Cross Red Crescent movement, and for reminding us that these have been questions that we've been asking for a very long time, and research like PIP's and HAG's is actually starting to answer those questions now. So I'm just going to remind everyone on the line that we do have a Slido. I'm just going to My screen is still shared. I'm just going to share my screen with you again. We have a Slido available for anyone interested in asking questions to either Pip or Mercedes. I've seen that we have a couple on here. The first one is for you, Mercedes, and also one for you, Pip. So I'll read off the first two. So Mercedes, how do you personally encourage and support young women in the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement? And then Pip, a question about localization. There are fewer locals in leadership positions in humanitarian actors. Is there a difference in gender composition between local and international staff? So either Mercedes or Pip, whoever would like to start.
I can start if you want.
Sure, please. Thank you, Mercedes.
Yeah, well, I think I don't have much experience in this, but I always like, as I said, to support the people I was working with, the people in the teams. And especially I consider that women need a special hand, close hand nearby. Because sometimes for different and cultural patterns, probably also it's a question of happening in Spain and maybe in other countries is not that much. Women in many cases left aside to their male colleagues the responsibilities of leadership in the organization, thinking that they have also to take care of the family, etc. So I was also always trying to promote the valuable women, and there are many, as there are also men, but trying to help more women who were working with me as responsible of areas or deputy directors if I was the director, if possible on equal conditions. Of course, I was not favoring more and not in an impartial way women than men. But I think that this, and then I learned, as I mentioned before last year, that unfortunately, in general, women, we are not supporting other women because we think they will compete with us, or I don't know, but that was a fact that it was presented during that interesting workshop of last year. And now I'm working with a person from Spanish Red Cross in supporting the team of the Standing Commission. I am working with people at my local level, and I have to say, I think it's much easier at local level, probably because there are many more women than men. And in that, I connect with part of the question that he was saying that if it is easier to work at local level with women than at international levels. I would say that definitely, at least here in my experience, is much easier to find valuable women at local level than at the headquarters level. Though I have to say in the Spanish Red Cross, for quite a large number of years, they were majority of directors of department women over men. So which is an indication that we were traditionally well supported and given confidence to go ahead.
Great, thank you, Mercedes. And I'm wondering, Pip, off of that question and Mercedes' answers, has your research shown any ways that we can close that gender gap between men and women in high-level leadership positions?
Yes, good big questions, which is important. I think in terms of what our research has done, and there's a couple of things that I think that I can talk to, but I think a lot of it's going to come out of the next stage of the research. And that will come from focusing on things like in more detail around recruitment practices, deployment of surge teams, composition of surge teams, etc. But also policies and processes that support and enable women's leadership. I think, and this comes not only from this piece of research, but I've recently done some work on learning pathways for women into leadership positions in looking specifically at the Pacific, but I did some larger scoping on that piece of work. And I think, and this is the wonderful thing about GLOW, is that one of the biggest pieces is around women having access to networks. Networks are both within their sectors, but more broadly, and that those networks are, in some instances, specifically women's networks, and that they leverage off two things: that they either set up specifically with resources behind it, a little bit like GLOW, that really push that. But what we saw, I think, interestingly in the research, is we were talking to organisations that were saying, oh, no, women are really supported and they feel really great, and there are no issues. Oh, but actually a whole group of women from X organisation internationally have banded together and created this informal network, so they have more support. And I think that shows that actually there's a lot of work there still to be done, because women are seeking out that additional support and those extra resources in order to feel supported, in order to find confidence, skills, avenues into leadership positions, and to problem solve with people that face a lot of the same challenges that they do. I think there's also a lot of work to be done around creating an enabling policy and process environment. So it's all well and good to have a policy or process that aligns with kind of the Rolls-Royce best practice or golden practice, but actually it's about understanding how are those policies and processes actually implemented within your organizations, how does staff perceive those policies and processes, what are their attitudes and practices around them. And I think that there's a whole piece of work to be done because, and you see that similar issues around PSCA policies, codes of conduct, etc., is that you can have the best policy, but actually if it's not implemented, it's not practiced, and it's not understood in the way that it's meant to, then it becomes a redundant policy. So I think at a high level, there are two massive pieces of work, and that networking piece as well leads to mentoring as well. I think that there are two pieces of work that I think are really important, but I think the next stage of the research is going to be really able to unpack that a little bit more. So I kind of don't want to make too many assumptions on pieces of research we haven't done yet. I hope that answers that question, but happy to take more questions on that. I think too, in terms of the localization question, it's a really interesting question, and I think one that we often grapple with as as a body that also has a focus on localization. So we created a measurement framework for localization in the Pacific we're now seeing is being applied to Asia and other contexts. And I think that people have this assumption that if you're a localized or you're a nationally led organization, that you have diversity and you have inclusiveness. But what we see is that it's actually the same group or same similar compositions. So it's those that have access to education. It's those that have often come from urban areas. It's those that have being able to potentially do some paid unpaid work. So I don't have the statistics in front of me, and that kind of goes as well to the question that specifically looks at inside on Red Cross and Red Cross movements. I don't have that set of data specifically with me, but I'm happy to go away and think through that a little bit more. In terms of the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, I take your point around the question around how leadership teams were perceived to be diverse and inclusive. And what we found is within the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, that those who were in leadership teams were, again, predominantly men at that more senior leadership positions, and that those who perceived their leadership teams to be more diverse and inclusive were men. So there were similar alignments. But I am happy to go away and cut that data if that's helpful. And Erica, I can potentially send that through to you around some of the Red Cross, Red Crescent specific data that came out of the report. Also just acknowledging that the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, I think, made up about 7% of respondents as well. So it's not a huge chunk of data. We're also hoping to have the Red Cross, Red Crescent involvement in the next phase of the research as well. So, there'll be reports and bits and pieces coming out from that, and all methodologies will be made public once they've been tested. So, it's something that you can go away and apply to your organisation. We're happy to support with that if needed.
Erica, can I ask a quick follow-up to that?
Yeah, we have a follow-up from the room. Can you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you so much for the presentations. It's really fascinating. I'm Katherine Griffin. I'm a senior legal advisor for humanitarian law with Canadian Red Cross. And Pip, I just wanted to ask a follow-up. So the data for the Red Cross would be super interesting. And it would be really helpful if you could have comparative data. So understanding, even if you just chose, for example, like the UN agencies, to understand a little bit more who you're asking within the UN agencies as well, just so that way we can see, because your data has said that who you ask the question to informs the response. So it would be interesting to be able to compare that, so that way we can see, are we asking the same question to different people within the different organizations? So just even to unpack a little bit one other institution, I think would be helpful from a data comparative perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Possible. Yeah, I'll have to go back to my data, but it's fine, no problem. It's yeah, let me see what I can pull. I'm happy to liaise with you through Erica as well, and if there are bits and pieces that we can do. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
it would all be with Erica. I'm just preempting the question I'm going to ask Erica. So I'm trying to take the question off her desk and ask it directly of you. Thank you so
no
much.
Problem.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That's fine.
Yeah, and that data I can share. So I'm going to be sharing the recording of this session. I can also share the data Pip gives me as well. So it's widely distributed. Nina?
Yeah, sorry, my name is Nina Sachdeva. I'm a Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Advisor here at the Canadian Red Cross. My question, and I'm sorry I missed the earlier part of your presentations, so you might have already addressed this, but it would be interesting to also know from us, the differences between countries or national societies which are in conflict zones, or have a combination of conflict and national disasters, and countries that are relatively stable. Like, where are the women in leadership positions within those two particular contexts, right? Would there be fewer women in leadership in conflict zones, or are they fairly equal?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess, good question. And I did touch on that briefly, that the report looks at that, not specifically to the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, but that contexts that were considered high or extreme risk, which were, often had alignment with ongoing or past conflict. We definitely saw an increase in males in leadership across the kind of spectrum, from kind of project and program level all the way up to senior leadership. And it was quite, the report doesn't quite have, I'm just pulling it up, sorry, it doesn't quite have, there were the quotes that were coming out were phenomenal, around people just saying, no, women shouldn't be in high risk zones, they don't have the skills, so it was quite, it's some interesting data anecdotally was coming out. And it's something that looking at Philippines, and we'll be looking at the capital, but also looking at Mindanao as well, where there's conflict and instability, and that will be something we can dive into deeper with the next phase of the research. And we're also hoping to potentially have a second case study country as well, which we're still unpacking, and that depends on who wants to be involved in it. So this research is very much, although you know, led by HAG, it's all about what our research partners, so those that organisations, whether it's Red Cross, Red Crescent Movement, UN agencies, INGOs, local NGOs have put their hand up and said we really want to be involved. So it's about tailoring different contexts in the research to the partners, because at the end of the day, we want this research to be useful, to inform and to inform good practice, and to inform how agencies approach diversity inclusion, and understanding the impact that can have on their organisations' practices in terms of humanitarian response as well. But yes, yeah, I will have to go back and see what cutting that data looks like in terms of the conflict zone specifically for Red Cross, Red Crescent. It's not quite as an easy thing as some of the other data, but leave it with me. And again, I can touch base with Erica.
And the Philippines example that you mentioned would be excellent, because we do actually have programming in the Philippines and also in Mindanao through the ICRC. So that would be very useful to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been in touch with, we're in the kind of process of planning, and given everything that's happening at the moment, just globally, you know, always can, travel plans can be thwarted like that. So it's kind of a keeping our finger on the pulse at the moment. But yeah, that's planned to go ahead in May, and can definitely keep you updated in regards to the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. And again, if we're doing the research in another country, really happy to keep you updated. And as I mentioned, these tools will eventually be public as well, and we encourage, similar to our localization tools, it will come out as a kind of a toolkit that we encourage people to and organizations to contact us to chat through how they can be applied, how we can support that as well. So that will happen once they've been tested and gone through a more kind of robust testing and review stage.
Sure. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I see a question that was too long for Slido from Olivia Cummins, who I know is at the British Red Cross. So her question is for Pip. Was data on ethnicity collected? I was surprised that racial hierarchy wasn't mentioned as a factor for international staff, more likely to hold leadership positions than local staff.
Yeah, really good question. I'm glad you asked it, because I was going to bring it up, and you'll see it's something, so in terms of racial and ethnic diversity and identity, again, we were informed by a number of experts of from a number of different backgrounds around the risk of collecting data around racial and race and ethnicity with such a blunt survey tool at such a global level. And for us, because this had never been done, it was around collecting as much information as we could in a way that would allow people to share the survey even further. And what we found through testing, so the development of the survey tool went through a rigorous process of being developed initially at a workshop, and then went through a number of review stages, including engaging the Chief Diversity Officer at Palladium International as well. And the decision was made that it would be a focus of the in-depth contextualized research. So it features heavily in our methodology for the next phase. But yeah, it wasn't collected, and it was something that we're really happy to be critiqued on and to unpack that further with people who are happy to engage in that conversation. But it was something that we were advised on by teams of experts that it wasn't going to be successful if we tried to collect it yeah, happy to answer further questions, and also happy to take that conversation offline if that's helpful as well, if people want to chat through that in more depth.
Great, thank you, Pip. A question for Mercedes about the Standing Commission. How many other women are on the Standing Commission? Let me unmute you. There we go. Oh,
Maybe she is.
I think you might have to unmute yourself, Mercedes.
Yeah,
there we go.
Sorry.
That's okay.
At the Standing Commission at this moment, well, you know, the Standing Commission has 9 members, 5 elected members, and 4 are representing 2 ICRC and 2 representing the International Federation. We are now 3 women, so which is a big step, because the previous commission, the one that stepped down in December, was no 1 woman. So we are now 3 out of the 9 members, and maybe it will come a 4th. It is 2 elected members, we are women, and 3 men. And from the representation from ICRC and the Federation, ICRC has the president and another woman, and the Federation, for the moment, they have the president and secretary general, and they are 2 men. So we are 3 out of 9.
Great. A great increase from before. 3 women.
Some colors in the pictures.
Some diversity on that website, yeah.
Unfortunately, we had the first meeting planned for last week, but we had to cancel because of the famous coronavirus all over. So we had a video conference. Some of us, we were present in Geneva, but we could not take a good picture of the Standing Commission to be shared with the world, because we are really willing to, but that will be in a few weeks, I hope.
Let's hope so. Thank you, Mercedes. I know Nicole in the room had a question for Pip. Go ahead, Nicole.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Nicole Main. I'm with the Global Programs team here at Canadian Red Cross. I wanted to ask Pip about the lack of age diversity in leadership teams, which is something you'd mentioned briefly. And given that we're all constrained by the bounds of time and space, it takes a while to gain experience and to gain knowledge. And how do we address that? How do we mitigate that when, of course, we want our leaders to be experienced and knowledgeable, but that often means it's a bit of an older demographic?
Yes, good question. And I think, yes, so I think it's about finding a balance. So recognizing that it is important to have experience and that in-depth knowledge that comes with being in the sector, you know, for however many years. But I think it's also what we value in leadership and how leadership is done as well. So, you know, we see that there are very traditional ways of leading and how decision making is done, and there are actually ways that you can what would be the word? You can, I guess, support and create pipelines and leadership opportunities for those who are younger, whether that's men, women, people more, you know, from all different diverse groups. And so I think it's about how leaders are inclusive of the different experiences that people can bring, because what we actually find is that younger people often bring a different mindset. They've gone through different experiences, often have gone through particularly university courses at different times, so think differently. And I think that isn't necessarily valued at the moment within the sector. So I think for me, it's around finding that balance and recognizing that, but also recognizing that leadership is how you define leadership and what good leadership looks like is shifting. And I think that making that shift to value what different people can bring at different from different levels, and it's not about, you know, someone who is very young and potentially inexperienced, or maybe only has that, you know, kind of 5 years. isn't expected to be in senior leadership, but it's around what sort of leadership tasks can you give them and support them in, that will mean that they can transition into leadership earlier and that they can start to influence decision making. And we're doing a really interesting thing in the Philippines, which is around decision mapping. So it's about asking someone, so you've got your leadership teams or team, and you ask somebody, okay, when you've got to make a decision, who are the 3 people you go to? And it's about mapping. You'll find that, in an organization of 100 and you've got a leadership team of 20, that it's actually the leadership decisions sit with the same 3 or 4 people, because they're always the ones that are being consulted because of the way that they lead or the perception of their how they're perceived within the organization, which means that you might have great diversity at your leadership team, but they're not influencing the decision making. So I think it's about understanding those dynamics within different organizations, and as I mentioned, rethinking how leadership is done as well. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much.
A question for both Mercedes and Pip from Slido. How can men support women's leadership? So a question about male allies. How can men support women's leadership? For either Pip or Mercedes?
Pip, you start. I started before.
Yeah, no worries. Another good question. I think, and there's lots of really great programs that are coming out about like male champions for change, male allyship within different organizations. I think what's important. I'm just trying to kind of, sorry, unpack. It's quite a big question when you go to answer it. I think there are lots of things. So taking things like the evidence and advocating in organisations around increasing diversity and why it's important. And a lot of organisations have that focus on gender, so it's an easier starting point because it's easier for people to understand and see. So there are lots of opportunities. I think it's around being aware I think it's about being aware of the different dynamics and power plays that may be present from a gendered lens within different organisations. And there are lots of subtle, unconscious biases that influence different people's interactions and experiences in the world. And I think one of the most powerful things that men or anyone can do is just be really aware and acknowledge them, both within your organisation, your team, but also within yourself, and to check yourself and to start to have that conversation within, with your teammates. And another, I guess, another really interesting tool that you can easily do to kind of get a bit of a pulse check would be around, if you're sitting in a team and it might be a team meeting or whatever it may be, and you can do things, and it's a really interesting experiment, and it can be applied to lots of different contexts, whether that's kind of the localization discussion or this discussion, is to sit and if you've got a watch and actually time how long different people talk for in a team meeting, and you'll find that it's dominated by, and we all know this, 2 or 3 different people. And I think starting to document that and check yourself is a really, really important first step. But I think I'm going to hand that over to Mercedes, because I think you will have a lot of great advice for that question as well.
No, I would say, as you were mentioning, I think men should be aware of the reality of what they have in the organization if they are men leaders. And I noticed in this report, the White Federation report sent yesterday with data sent by the Secretary General, he was saying that we have now 12.9 million volunteers. Out of that, 53% of women, 44% are men. Regarding personnel, the staff is 472,000. and 57% is women, 39% are men. If we go to the leadership positions, it's 80% men in president's position, 20% women. So I think this 80% could think about what is the base of the organization. And if it is 53 or 57% women in volunteers and staff, why in presidencies it's only 20%? And regarding secretary generals, and this is the maximum percentage, is 35% women, while 65% are men. And then there is another data regarding governing boards of the, I hope from national societies, not from federation only, because it will not be this figure, but regarding national societies, and it says 31% of the composition of governing boards are women. So if only 31% are women in governing boards, where are the rest until the 50 plus that they are existing at the volunteer base or staff base of the national societies?
Thank you, Mercedes and Pip. And I think it's another answer to that question, I think, could be a lot of the institutional changes we're making. What comes to mind to me is the Manila Declaration that was made at the Asia Pacific Conference, stating that they were aiming for gender parity in leadership. I know at the Inter-Americas Conference, women leadership was included in the Buenos Aires commitment as well as the recent constitutional amendments in terms of gender balance at the statutory meetings. So I think Pip and Mercedes, you both made great points. You, as men, you need to acknowledge your privilege and your power, and we also need to remain very aware of the data and what exists and what it shows us, and acknowledging the reality of it. With that, I see we're short. We're coming to the end now. I'd like to take a moment to thank both Mercedes and Pip. Pip and Heg, thank you for the research you do. And Mercedes, thank you for your commitment to the Red Crescent movement. And I'd like to give you a round of hand here. And for everyone online, thank you for attending. This was the first webinar we've done of this sort. I know at one point we were up to 80 participants around the movement. So thank you all. Happy International Women's Week, we'll say. So, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Erica. I just wanted to flag too, if anyone would like to get in touch with myself or HAG more broadly, my email's in the back of the Data on Diversity report, but also Erica can definitely link us in. So I encourage questions, comments, critiques. We are very open to that conversation.
Great, thank you. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Pip, for staying up late for us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
Thank
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Erica.